let me start with a little bit of high level stuff in the car industry. About 10 years ago, I noticed that there are four distinct shifts happening in the car industry. These are technological shifts, what most people would consider disruptive technologies. One is the shift to electric vehicles in general. But then separate from that is this shift to software being the foundation of cars.
Mm.
And then there's this sort of shift that is happening with autonomous vehicles, the stuff that you guys are working on as well. And then the shift that autonomous vehicles enables, which is this car as a service possibility and robotaxis in the future. So at a high level, we want to talk about those four things, disruptive technologies that are happening to the car industry, probably over decades. It started maybe a decade ago. It might go on for another decade or two. First of all, is that how you see it happening as well? And did we miss anything there? What are your thoughts on all of that stuff?
Well, it is interesting. I mean, I characterize it in a very similar way that I would say it's inconceivable that a car company can exist at scale and maintain market share. When I say at scale, meaning like a large volume manufacturer and a niche manufacturer, and not be operating with a software-defined architecture. So an architecture that features can be updated regularly, not just like at the surface level, but deeply across the vehicle, which requires a complete reset to how the electronics are set up in the vehicle, but ultimately really software-enabled, which then drives an AI-enabled architecture. So that's number one. And then the second thing, which I think is even more binary, is the necessity to have higher levels of autonomy. And this one's maybe the harder one to imagine and predict. But if you were to look at the rate of progress that's happening in self-driving over today and through the next 5 years, and you compare that to the rate of progress that has happened over the last 5 years, our view is it's entirely different. So with the introduction of neural net-based approaches and transformer-based encoding, we're going to see much more rapid advancement of autonomy. And our view is that by certainly the late 2030s or late 2020s, the idea of like hands off and eyes off, where you can be on your phone, texting, reading a book in the car, we think is going to start to become a required expectation. And if you have it, you can gain market share. If you don't have it, you're going to lose market share. And then not too far after that, again, maybe by 29, maybe 2030, level 4 being available and the things that we purchase, not just through robotaxis or through rideshare service, but actually expecting to have the ability for your car to go pick up your kids or drop you at the airport, we think is going to become increasingly important. And again, we think a small number of companies will have that. The ones that do will capture a tremendous amount of market share. The ones that don't will either have to buy it as a technology or will accept the outcome of them shrinking.
These are the disruptive technologies that Clay Christensen wrote about in a book in the 90s, is basically explaining why the incumbents usually have a disadvantage. When you started Rivian, is that part of the shifts that you saw, that like these things are happening, we want to be the company that helps bring these shifts to the consumers?
Yeah, I'm smiling because we definitely were thinking about a lot of these things. I think when I started the company, I probably had a more aggressive view for how fast the nature of how we consume transportation was going to change. And I'd say my view on this has actually evolved. So if you'd asked me maybe 10 years ago, I would have had a more aggressive view that the method of consuming miles or the method of consuming transportation would shift to new business models. I now think that the business models are going to evolve, but they'll evolve in ways that are probably more nuanced. And maybe that's because I had kids, but particularly in markets like the United States, where we're a wealthy market, we can afford, and our society's become used to the idea of buying a car. Today, 95% of the miles traveled. So globally, we have 10 trillion miles are driven every year. In the United States, around just over 3 trillion miles are driven. And of those 3 trillion miles driven in the United States, more than 95% of them are in assets that we own. So our household owns them, which allows us to do things like leave a car seat in the back, or put a gym bag in the front, or put a basketball in the trunk. I don't think we're going to go from 95% of the miles traveled in the United States being things that we own to 5%, and the remainder being some form of rideshare. I do think rideshare is going to grow, but I think the way that we think about interacting with our vehicle is going to change. And so what that means is we may go from a world where a 3-vehicle household becomes a 2-vehicle household because the utility and the utilization of the vehicle is higher. We may find different ways of consuming the car. So you, instead of owning it in the classical sense, you're sharing it amongst a group of friends. You may find, the pure simplest form is like pure rideshare, robotaxi, but you may find lots of variations of that where you own a car, it's configured for you, but if you go out of town, you let it go out and give people rides. So I just think there's going to be many versions of how we consume transportation. Ultimately, I do think
autonomy.
It's called early 2030s, but I do think the number of miles traveled is going to grow.
Right.
I think ultimately the cost of accessing a mile is going to be lower. And so whether that grows from 3 trillion miles driven in the United States to 4 or 3 to 3.5 or 3 to 5, I don't know. And then the question becomes, if the number of miles traveled grows, how does that relate to the size of the car park? So do we do that with less vehicles, by utilizing them more efficiently, or do we number of vehicles grow slightly, but the utilization allows us to get to higher mileage per vehicle? Those are the big unknowns. But certainly there's like zero doubt in my mind that level 4, the ability for the vehicle to drive itself empty, by early 2030, it's going to define the auto industry.